All right, so let's take a look at how load placement can affect the lever system for human movement. So we'll use a squat as the example here, and we'll look particularly at the knee joint and how load placement can be modified or manipulated to help train around knee pain. So with this, it's important to understand that nothing is necessarily good or bad in singularity. Everything should always be analyzed as, is this better or worse for the athlete based on what they're showing me or what's currently going on? So when we have knee pain, we want to look at, first and foremost, where the load is placed and how much distance is created from where the load is to where the knee is. What that's referred to as is the moment arm. The longer the moment arm, the greater the amount of torque that's going to be experienced at the joint. So if we look at something like a post rack or a front rack or a front squat, we notice that there's going to be a very long moment arm for the knee. That in and of itself is going to normally be problematic for the knee because it's going to be expected to take on more torque, which the knee is not fundamentally designed to do. What we also notice with a third class system is that the effort and the load are on the same side of the fulcrum, which again, mostly speaking, is an inefficient setup. Conversely, on the opposite end, when we have a first class lever or this below waist loading, what we notice is that moment arm or that distance is significantly reduced. So that in and of itself, again, is going to normally be a pragmatic step for training around knee pain. With this, we also notice that the effort and the load are on opposite sides of the fulcrum. What that does is it helps for more equal distribution of force across the effort or across the musculature that's involved in the squatting action. With both of these, we're going to have pros and cons. So these listed down here aren't necessarily, again, good or bad or right or wrong, they just are. But on an above waist loading setup, we're normally going to be mostly quad dominant. It's going to have an increased demand on the trunk because the trunk is going to be responsible to help keep the load in position. So that's going to force a more upright torso position. And with that, we're also going to have normally a reduction in dorsiflexion angle. Because the trunk is more upright, the center of mass stays over top of the midfoot a little bit more, so we don't have that same ability to get into deeper dorsiflexion angles because the trunk is leaning with us. Now on the opposite end, with the below waist loading patterns, we're going to see mostly ham dominant, a decreased demand on trunk musculature, and because of this, we're going to have an increased inclination of trunk angle, and that is going to typically correspond with an increase in dorsiflexion angle. So with these, if we have two simple examples, and we say one is a patellar tendon problem, one is a quad tendon problem. For the quad tendon problem, this is going to be problematic. I'm going to prefer this, or for instance, a hex bar deadlift in lieu of a front squat if we're having quad tendon problems. Conversely, if we're having patellar tendon problems, I'm probably going to actually prefer something like a Zercher hold as opposed to a suitcase or a deep dorsiflexion angle movement, because that deep dorsiflexion is going to put more strain on the patellar tendon. With all of these different factors, what we really want to hone in on is right over here. How much trunk lean, how much dorsiflexion, and then here, what is the range of motion, path of motion, and the speed of motion. These three variables are critical. With the range of motion, kind of like I was just mentioning with quad tendon versus patellar tendon, the range of motion is going to govern or basically demand certain tissues to do more or less. So if we're above 90, it's going to be more demanding on ACL, quad tendon. If we're below 90, more meniscus and more patellar tendon. Path of motion is going to speak to the kinetic sequencing, or the rate and the sequence in which muscles fire. And the speed of motion is going to basically dictate or govern whether it's a tendinous issue, ligamentous issue, or muscular issue. We can control the response of pain by controlling the speed of the movement.